Vernomatic Productions.
Are you ready?
Live from the Metal Mayhem Studios in Rochester, New York.
We are gold. We are gold.
And heard around the world by metalheads just like you. This is Metal Mayhem ROC.
Heavy metal music.
Your weekly dose of metal music, interviews, album reviews, news, and more. Want to be part of the show? Send us a message through our website, metalmayhemroc.com, or hit us up on Facebook and Twitter. Search Metal Mayhem ROC.
It's getting nice and heavy.
Now, welcome our hosts, John the Vernomatic Verno, and direct from New Jersey, Metal Walt.
Good evening, everybody. Hope everyone's doing well, staying healthy, enjoying springtime. I know I certainly am. Well, we're continuing our celebration of International Guitar Month with a real good one. Metal Walt welcomes Savatage guitarist Chris Caffery and vocalist Zak Stevens. They're here to discuss the much-anticipated tour kicking off April 19th at the Monsters of Rock show down in Brazil. Metal Walt, these are one of your favorites. Tell us all about it, man, because you're certainly like a kid on Christmas morning with this interview.
Absolutely, John. I mean, this one was like, couldn't wait to talk to guys I've been following for the last 30 years, and I've seen them so many times in concert. So it was a bit of an excitement there. I was a bit of a fanboy on the sideline, but this is a big return to the stage. These guys, the band never broke up. They never went on hiatus. Nobody ever quit. It's just that I think TSO, Trans-Siberian Orchestra, got so big and took off. This just became less of a priority. And let's be honest, John, they're making a shit ton of money with TSO. But you know what? Chris passes away only a few years ago. Producer and visionary Paul O'Neill passes away. John Oliva's had his health struggles. And I think now just became the time where everybody said, let's do this now while we're still here.
This is one of those bands where they have different chapters. I got into the band during the Avatar demo and the Sirens, Dungeons, Power of the Night era. Metal Walt's a few years younger, picks up with them on, Gutter Ballet and Hall of the Mountain King, and stayed with them throughout this whole period. It's a good interview. But before we dive into this, just a quick reminder, we invite you to get up to metalmayhemroc.com. Sign up for the newsletter. That gets you notifications about new episodes on our audio podcast site, YouTube interviews, Monday night live radio reminders. Visit the merch page, tons of stuff there. And listen, if you dig what we're doing here, subscribe to the pod, leave a review, and we'll read it on future episodes. All right, let's get into this. Chris Caffery, Zak Stevens, Savatage, talking about the return to the stage. For my co-host, Metal Walt, I'm the Vernomatic, and we are Metal Mayhem ROC.
All right, guys, so the news is out. Listen, you guys can repeat everything you said to the other 100 people, but we're going to try to change it up a little bit today, maybe make it fun. But again, here, off the bat, what inspired the decision to restart Savatage in 2025? Zak, you just mentioned the call came in July, so why is this the right time now versus the other 30 years we've been waiting?
Well, I mean, I think that it just was a situation where, we got the lineup, we got the guys, we're all here. John will be joining us if not right away, but everybody wanted to do it. And I think that there just had to be some things that were gotten out of the way, in the back end. I think, legal things, this and that. I mean, of course, the biggest thing that happened was us losing Paul O'Neill when Paul O'Neill passed away. And it took a long time to figure out where the Savatage component of the whole thing should go. And that's really what we were waiting on with the family, and getting everybody feeling the same way, getting a blessing from everybody. And that's what took a little bit of time.
We had talked about it at Wacken about doing things again. And of course, like Zak said, we lost Paul. And then, that was really difficult to overcome. And then the world stopped for COVID. So, and we had that. And then, John started talking about doing things. And I always tell people that, whether he realizes it or not, that interview he did with Rockhard in Greece, I think might have been like a little fuse that spurred a lot of discussions, because at that point in time, of course, after that, he had some help. issues and things that had happened to him that was really delaying recording and what we wanted to do. But through John speaking about us doing something new for Savatage, I know I started to get a ton of emails. Would you guys be interested in playing my festival? And I think our management was, and the agencies were, and out of nowhere, we all got a call last year, saying we want to do a conference call with Savatage, and that's when everybody asked us if they said there's some really good offers. You guys want to play? And I personally almost started crying. I've been waiting a long time, man. I'm a huge fan of the band as well as being in it. And I was always trying to explain to people what I thought was going to happen, but I said my crystal ball broke, so now we're just back. We're back at it. And I'm really excited about it. I'm taking it a day at a time. And every single day that I see that Savatage is a current part of the life, it's a good thing. It makes me real happy.
Well, I want to ask you something about that Wacken show, because again, you guys haven't necessarily toured in 20-something years, right? But the last time the band played was at that Wacken, and that was a unique experience, right? Because it was like TSO on one stage, Savatage on another stage, and then you guys played offsetting sets, and then you kind of came together. So what memories do you have on that? Because that was 10 years ago.
Well, Paul O'Neill doesn't do anything or didn't do anything. I say doesn't. I make that stumble all the time because it's one of these things where everything we do still to this day involves so much of Paul. So it's really hard to ever speak of him in the past tense. I know he's passed, but it's crazy. But he would never do anything that wasn't completely over the top. And it's just the way he was. So, of course, he got the idea to have the both bands running together at once. And asked Zachy how much work was put into that. It was pretty crazy. I mean, we started on the one side doing Savatage, and then TSO had played, and Zach went over and sang the couple Savatage songs they were doing at that point in time. And then at the end, we all bonded together and did a big giant set of Savatage and TSO songs, with the only time both stages were running together with 80,000 people. And I'm looking out in the field and I see Pyro in the field. And I'm like, that's weird. I never saw Pyro in the field before. And that, he flew over 2 arena stages and production and everything. And we spent a month rehearsing for the one show. And we got there and it was really bad weather the night before. And we were supposed to sound check and rehearse through it once. We couldn't. So we never even had a chance to run that on a real stage. That performance was the only time that we ever did it on the stage. So it was pretty crazy.
Well, the good thing is that in order to rehearse it, and thanks to Paul again, we went to the fairgrounds down in Tampa at the Seminole on the Seminole Reservation, which also has the Seminole Hard Rock Casino and Hotel. So we had to get this giant building that had the exact same dimensions as the 2 stages. Because like Chris said, that was the first time in 26 years of the festival up to that point where both main stages were running at the same time. They had never had that. So we marked off the floor of the giant building that we rehearsed in at the fairgrounds. Down, they had the markings down to the inch. And basically, if not for rehearsing, running back and forth, a couple hundred feet backstage,
the big difference there, though,
we would have never known what to do.
That the difference there, though, was that was on a flat floor in a warehouse room where you looked to your left and you saw the other stage. The difference was when we got to Wacken, we're on the other stage, and when you were looking, you couldn't see the other stage. The only thing you could do is hear it in your ears. So
that's right.
It was, no matter what we rehearsed as far as where we were standing and what we were going to be doing as far as performing on stage, the actual thing about getting on both stages, and Al Petrelli was musical directing the whole thing for a microphone on his side of the stage so we could hear a lot of things from there. And it was like that whole thing was supposed to be run the night before on the stages. We had done it through the set in Florida, but we never did it in that setting. So it was really literally like, here we go.
On the fly. Yeah, Paul said, guess what? We were going to do a couple of songs to get used to it. Now we're not. So guess what? It's on the fly. Go for it. It's either going to be, you know what I mean? Go out there and make it a success. You know, don't go the other way. So he goes, let's go for it. So everybody was like, you know, had a lot of energy. I think the energy that we had overcame all the anything technical.
Yeah, it was crazy rain too, like it is always over there. And you know, there was the typical half a foot of mud, and you know that was going on out there. So when we wanted to play, the rain was blowing the water in at the stage, so we couldn't even we couldn't rehearse anything. It's not like we were able to try to run pyro or anything that we were doing with the wind doing what it did.
It did fit real nicely with all the songs from Wake of Magellan, though. It couldn't have been more perfect.
Yeah.
You know, to sing it about the, you know, you're on the deck of the ship and the you know and the you know the sea, you know, rain and the sea mist, and you know, as it was the rain is coming into the boat as you're singing. And I thought it was really cool because the rain kind of kicked in, went into the guitar feature, the storm, off the Wake of Magellan album. And it really was very fitting. As soon as he started playing the storm, it stormed and it blew onto the stage. And then when we played the Hourglass, it was blowing in, but it was perfect. You're singing about the ship. You're singing about what's going on the ship, people getting murdered, which is basically what some of the songs are about. So it was like great.
Yeah, it was definitely pretty cool. I watched you could see in the videos, it's like I'm getting rained on. It was a head full of rain.
Nick, I got pictures where I'm singing. You could see you could just see
a head full of rain. It was a head full of rain, Zach. A head full of rain.
There you go.
That's right.
So guys, you guys are both members of TSO East along with Jeff Plate. And I want to bring our listeners up to speed in case they don't know this. And Johnny Lee Middleton and Al Petrelli are in TSO West. So I live in New Jersey. I try to get to the Prudential show every year. I was just there in December. And I think it's cool that you guys, every year you sprinkle in a couple of Savatage songs. So I got to share a funny story. We had Angus Clark on the show for his Kunes Clark promotion. And this was back in September. And he was just about ready to go to rehearsals. And I said, Angus, I think I want to request Metal Walt wants to hear When the Crowds Are Gone on this tour. I said, so you got to go tell somebody Metal Walt said so. And voila, you guys played it.
That's right. We did. And I don't think that was on the West set. That was on the East set, but not.
Yeah.
Was it on the West?
No, it wasn't on the West set.
It was not. That was us.
That was something that they had
different tribute
we were
numbers.
Talking about earlier in the year. We thought it was very coincidental, but I'll credit you for it.
Yeah, I'll give you credit.
Yeah, that was, you know, every time we try to add one we hadn't heard before, just to give people a chance to hear, you know, those songs on that stage with that. That was pretty haunting for me in a lot of ways this year, just because of the fact we were going back to playing Savatage again. And then, you know, we're doing crowds and I'm just sitting there all through that whole show, especially that spot. You know, I start thinking about, you know, when that video was filmed back in 1990 for that song and you know, all the time and years that we've spent, and we have spent a long time waiting to do this, the guys in the band. So for us, it's, you know, it's kind of like, Zach speaks of vacations, you know, and, you know, TSO is such an amazing gig. And, you know, we've done it every year, you know, other than the COVID year, for over 25 years. And, it's awesome, but there's just something about Savatage, you know? So it's like, I said it the other day in an interview, I was like, well, you know, all these years we're going on he's speaking of vacations. It's like, you know, you're kind of going to like this quiet, really super over the top adult resort. And then all of a sudden it's like we get to go to Disneyland. You know, it's like the kids get to go to Disneyland again. And that's what I feel like. It's like, you know, we're going back to where we were playing when we were little kids, being with Savatage, because that's what it was. I did my first tour with them when I was 19. So it's kind of like a, you know, a return back to your childhood in a lot of ways of a touring musician going back to Savatage. And it's going to be a lot of fun to get out with these guys in that circumstance. I mean, we went and did some photos, and we were auditioning keyboard, you know, players for the shows. And we don't even spend 5 seconds without laughing our butts off now. It's like, it's a lot of fun. We're having a good time. And I think that that whole energy is going to get onto the stage, and we've been playing for 25 years. It's not like, we were sitting around and got, day jobs and did this, that, and the other thing, and we want to come back to being musicians. We've been doing a heavy duty touring thing every year, and 50, 60 shows in 2 months with 8 and 10 a week. And it's something that we're ready to go and do what we did back then the best we ever had, because we're pretty good at what we do. So we've had a lot of practice.
So Chris and Zak, John was at that show in Newark, and I remember it was really special. I was at the afternoon show, not just because of the Savatage songs, because the whole night is always amazing, but there's John at the soundboard, and he's in a wheelchair, but you could just see, Chris, you ran around back during one of your running events, and he was right there doing this whole thing like this guy's crazy. So how is John doing both mentally and physically these days?
He's still, we just saw him in Florida. He walked into the studio and he was out of the wheelchair. So he's getting better. I think this is inspiring him. He's the one who really made the final decision for us to do this, and he's working on our set lists and our live shows. And we wouldn't have a Savatage without John. John is it's kind of like when TSO played, Paul wasn't on stage, but TSO was Paul O'Neill's band. It's kind of the same thing with Savatage. John's a part of every single thing we're doing right now, every decision we're making on everything. And I thought he's in really good spirits, and I think he's inspired to get there with us. I know he wants to do it, and that's something I spoke to him about before we left rehearsals with TSO, because I'm like, I've never done this without you. And we were having a pretty emotional bunch of conversation that evening. And he just looked at me and said, would you go play these fucking songs? He wants us to go hear him and his brother and Paul's music. And that's, for me, that's all I really need to hear. If John Oliva was saying, this is bullshit, man, I don't want these guys playing on, it's like, then you wouldn't feel right about it. But it's like I said, he was the one who said, go play, and this is what I want you to play. And it's just, he's there, and it's, in a lot of ways, it does feel, until he's back on stage with us, it feels like the same way it did when Paul was around with TSO. And John was always there every TSO rehearsal too. It's like, he's never left being around us when we're working. He just was not on the stage there either. So he's assuming, a role that many of you may not even know that he had at rehearsals with TSO, and working with Paul on, which songs were going to be played, and which singers were doing what songs and stuff like that. He's always been a part of that, part of the family. He wrote a lot of that music with Paul. It just feels right. We're going back to the studio where Savatage recorded its first couple records and Edge of Thorns, and to do the rehearsals, because Paul had purchased that studio, and it's just, there's a lot of really good spirits involved with what's happening right now when we get together. And I think that there's a couple decades of fans that haven't had a chance to see us, and there's a couple decades of fans that have missed seeing us. So
Chris, this is great to hear, and I'm happy to know that John is in good spirits, and you know what, he's involved with you guys, and he's right there with you. Granted, he won't be on the stage, but that he's actively involved in the decision making and the planning. We're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we're going to hear about Chris joining Savatage in the late 80s, and then the change in the band into the early 90s and what was to come.
Metal Mayhem ROC.
Chris, I also want to give credit for Criss Oliva, right? Because you came in the band 1989, 1990, around there. I remember seeing you at the Lemoore show. It was on Gutter Ballet, September 1990 at Lemoore with Trouble. And I think that was when you first joined the band. But, you're also carrying the legacy of Criss Oliva forward as well. I mean, for you, what was it like to be mentored by Criss coming into a band at a young age?
Well, the funny thing was, I started working with him when I just turned 19. And, at that point in time, Savatage was finishing Mountain King. And I worked with Paul in a band called Heaven that had that song Knocking on Heaven's Door that was on MTV. And their guitar player, Mitch Perry, had left. And I managed to get that gig to replace Mitch when I was 17. So Paul was my first producer and manager at that point. And the Heaven thing stopped working with Paul, but Paul started working with Savatage, and he just said, I think this band's sound should be bigger live. So it was kind of like, Paul, being the visionary that he was, picturing how he wanted the band to sound when it got to the live thing, kind of like added me to the mix for the band's live shows, and the band didn't necessarily want that at the time. Criss didn't need another guitar player. He was a Van Halen fan, and it was kind of, you had the Olivas and the Van Halens, and he was Savatage's Eddie Van Halen, and it was by me going to Florida to audition because they decided to use another guitar player in Florida, which they really weren't going to use. They just told management they had somebody who they were just going to take on the tour and make them, he was going to play a couple little keyboard things on the side of the stage and really not a whole lot of guitars. But I was like, this is my gig, because Paul had mentioned it to me. I learned all the songs. So the one thing that me and Criss had in common back then was our rhythm playing. We had a lot of the same influences, and when we played rhythm guitar together, it sounded like it was a stereo of Criss with Criss. And that was the thing that, when I flew myself to Florida, I said, I want this gig. I paid to fly myself. And I said, if they don't like me, I'll eat the ticket and go home. If they like me, I'll stay. And we were doing a tour with Dio and Megadeth, and we played a couple songs, and the sound was so cool. It was so right that they brought me out. And, it took a little while to get me into the band. But I mean, through all those years that I worked with them, I played a couple hundred shows easily with Criss. It was, we used to play a lot. We played from the beginning of February to the end of October. It wasn't like tours went, a couple months then. You just kept playing. Our itineraries kept showing up on the Gutter Tour. As we were on the tour, you would see the next 5 weeks show up on your bus one day. You weren't going home. You just kept going. I think we crossed America 5 times. So through all that, as a person, I learned a lot of things. And as a guitar player, I got to watch what he was doing and listen to what he was doing. He would show me a lot of his licks. And, I could not play what he played lead-wise at that time, but I was able to see it, and it was like, and then I knew exactly how he was getting the sound and what I wasn't doing to get that sound. He was the one who made me aware of the fact that, he was getting his tone out of his hands and not so much out of the effects, because he came to my house and I had a little practice amp and I had a distortion on the amp, and he was just like, you really use this much gain? And he turned it down. He's like, dude, you don't need that much. And that little thing like that, there's tons of things that he had taught me, personally and musically, that just mentored into me. And, my own brother was kind of pressuring me to do some things. And back then, you really were kind of a horror if you had more than one band. So like an idiot, instead of staying in Savatage where I really wanted to be, I followed over to my brother, back working with John in a year. But the thing that really was the saddest thing to me was I felt like I'd let Criss down, and he made a position in his band for me that wasn't there for anybody else. I always speak to people and I said, there's no original members on this tour. It's like, well, actually there is, because there was never a 5th member of Savatage until me. It was a position that was made for me because I went on that Mountain King tour and they liked me and they made that position for me. So I always felt like I let him down, So when he passed, I was really fucked up by that, because, those were years that I wasn't going to get back, that I would have had if it wasn't for my own personal decision. And we were always on this way of getting back to working together again. I'd gotten calls from Criss and people to go and do things on the Edge of Thorns tour. I don't even know if Zak knew some of the calls I was getting at the time, but, they had called me to go back out on the management on the Streets tour, but they never let the band know about it. So I was going to go play thinking I was staying on the tour, and the band was kind of upset at the way that the management presented that, because they wanted to see the band go back to the live band that was there for Gutter. And that was frozen at that time. So I was almost back into Savatage on the Streets tour. I packed my shit and thought I was heading to our tour bus, and Wackles called me and he's like, I hear you're going to Baltimore tomorrow. Well, I don't expect anything too exciting, because the band, didn't really know what the plan was about that. So, it was always close. And I just feel now it's like the best thing I can do is try to make sure that I let as many people hear his music as possible, since he's not there to do it, and now that I'm 30 years older than I was when I last played with him, or saw him, it's a lot of experience and a lot of heart and soul goes into my hands and my playing every time that I do his music. And I think that it's the best I've been at representing what he does now. So I'll never be him, and I never want to be him. It's like, I just want to make sure that I pay the best tribute to him possible.
Well, I appreciate the honesty there. But, Zach, for you, you came in for Edge of Thorns, but I mean, in a sense, like what Chris said earlier, it'll feel weird for John not to be there physically on stage for this tour. But there was a point in time where you took over, and I don't know if John was even out there, I think, on the Edge of Thorns tour. I'm not sure. But what was it like for you when you came in the early 90s, or early 2000s, whatever year it was, 90s? But to take over, what did John teach you that you've taken forward now?
Well, I mean, I was singing, Savatage songs in the garage of the house I grew up in, like kind of like saying, man, this would be kind of cool to sing for this band, when I was in college. I was just like putting them on and singing just to have a little reverb in the garage. Didn't really know what I was doing too much. And, I'd put that on and just say like, man, that'd be a really cool band to sing for. That'd be neat. Just kind of having thoughts like that, not knowing that, guess what? One day you're in and you meet these guys when you're working in Los Angeles, like I was doing. You wind up meeting the guys when they go play on the Gutter. When Chris was there the first time, it was a Gutter Ballet tour. And then I saw him again on the Streets tour. And I just got to say hey briefly and say, hey, how's it going? Then I heard through a couple of friends, they were looking for a singer. John was going to take, take a back seat for a while. He was burnt. I know for a fact, because I was playing with a band up there in Boston with Jeff Plate, Wicked Witch. We went and reconvened after we had started, and the one lineup didn't work out. So I flew back up there, and then guess what? We went to the Channel, an old rock club, that famous rock club that existed at the time in the 1990. Up there in Boston, and we just went there to, hey, let's have a few beers there. Let's meet there. I just flew into town. We'll talk about what we want to do now with the line. We go there, and guess who's playing? Savatage. So John's sitting at the bar. I say, hey, how's it going? Oh, okay. I know. I remember you because we met in Los Angeles. And I'll say, well, how's it going? He's like, man, I'm tired. I'm just like, I'm burnt. I'm just like, it was a foreboding of things to come, because, a little bit later I heard that they're looking for singers. So I sent a demo in that sounded nothing like John, and it turned out to be that was what they were looking for. I mean, they probably got 50 demos of people, trying to sound like John. Then we found out we don't want anybody trying to sound like him. We want something different. So that lucky enough for me, that was what mine represent. And Dawn Oliva, Criss Oliva's wife, really liked it, and she was pushing it to the band. You gotta say that. That helped me out a lot. Dawn was in everybody's face.
I
Chris.
remember when me and John were at that point in time, we were like staying in a warehouse out there in that Chris worked in during the day and this and that. And I remember when Zach started coming into the fold, and Chris came up to me, and the thing he said to me, because we were really good friends with Ray Gillen in Savatage, because Paul had produced Outlands, and we were friends with Ray, and Ray had sang on Strange Wings and this and that, and he came up to me. He said, "We got this guy that I really like," and he said, he doesn't sound like John. He goes, he sounds more like Ray Gillen, and that's what Chris was really excited about. I think because he knew exactly it would be like somebody replacing Chris.
You're not going to replace John,
get Chris, and so nobody I think the smartest thing that Savatage did was to get somebody that was unique to themselves. And that Zak, his voice is extremely unique. When he sings, I know you said, will you do these Savatage songs with TSO? And yeah, there's two bands. And when the other band does Zak, there's usually somebody that sings the music very well. But when Zak makes the best Zak Stevens I know. You know, when he sings, there's this tone and this thing in his voice that makes his particular voice, the one you hear on Edge of Thorns, the one you hear on Chance, the one you hear on Handful of Rain, the one you hear on all those songs, you recognize that voice. And that's the thing about it that was really cool when John and Zak were singing together on tour and on these records, because you
you said
those two animals
you
together.
touched on John. See, John has always been there since the very beginning, since I came to the band. He's there saying, hey, relax. He's coaching. That's what he's doing now. Nothing has ever changed. Whether I was in the lineup, yeah, you're right. John wasn't in the live lineup at the time, but he was right there doing exactly what he's doing right now. He's there, and it makes me feel so good that we're, bouncing everything off of him. Every phase of what we're doing is going through John. So that makes me feel really good, that he's there. And if I ever have an idea, hey, I'm going to try this, I'm running it by him, because he's the one who kind of groomed me to, be in the band. I didn't sound like, when I first joined those guys and Criss and all that, I didn't sound like what I do now. That was developed, and it was developed by John and Paul O'Neill and Criss Oliva. An amazing year he had. And he said, hey, we got time to make up. You're going to live in my house when you join the band, because we got time that we need to make up. We got to write. We got to, I'm going to get to know you. So he said, you're moving in my house. Don't even worry about a roommate. So I actually lived with him almost the first year in the band, and see, that helped, because the guy was just amazing. I think we did upwards of like maybe close to 100 shows before his passing. And it was a year that was packed. We had really a big metal radio hit in Edge of Thorns. You wouldn't go anywhere. We do a US tour. We couldn't go anywhere with it. You get in the car, Edge of Thorns is playing. We had like 50 stations that had over 500 spins on that song. That was big, and that really boosted that record. And if we, with Chris passing, I know that stopped things, but we were on a roll, and I think we could have maybe pushed that thing to gold or platinum. I really think, the way that the momentum was there.
Band, I know for a fact, because I was getting, like I said, calls at the time at certain situations about if I would be available because that tour was looking to continue from where it stopped. And there was a couple of tours that they were looking at for them to do. And then I got the phone call from Savatage's, wound up being Savatage's drum tech for Jeff on the tours that he had done with me. At first, this guy Jack Gartley that we all knew from Florida called me up to tell me that Criss had passed one Sunday morning. I was actually in the room I'm in right now practicing. I was playing guitar.
You'll never forget where you were, ever. It was Johnny called me. I got the call from Johnny Lee. Horrible.
Johnny had called me to tell me that my guitar tech had passed away from Savatage and TSO when because he had lived in a condo around Johnny, and it was at a point in time where there was I think my dad passed in 2016, and from 2016 to about 2 years ago, it was just like every other month somebody was passing away. It was crazy. So every time my phone rang, it's like most people don't call you on the phone, they text you or they don't call at all. So I was seeing these people call, and I didn't want to answer the phone because it was a lot of times, it was too many times where it was somebody passing. When we had that, year where my guitar tech had died, and then Paul had died, and there was a couple other people in John's crew that died, and I was literally at a Foreigner concert at Bethel Woods up here by me, talking to a couple of our crew guys, and then the one crew guy, Criss Lepperage, was out with the TSO for many, many years, and he knew everybody, and my guitar tech from TSO was out on the other side of the Foreigner stage. and the phone rings, and it's Savatage's lighting guy, Taz, who unfortunately became like the Grim Reaper, because every time Taz called me up, it was some kind of, but he called me to tell me that Adrenaline Mob's tour bus got into an accident, and that I was like, oh my God, well, how's first things first. I was thinking of Adrenaline Mob. I always thought of Russell, because it was Russell's band, and then David Z was brought in afterwards. So I said, well, how's Russell? He said he's beat up and he's got a little bit of a burn, but he's gonna live. And I said, well, how's David Z? And he's like, silent. So he didn't make it. And I was like, here I was just talking to all these people about all the people that had just passed. And I walked onto the other side of the stage, and they're like, what's going on? And I was like, you're not going to believe this. And then it was just like
in
that,
a lot of ways, those
and
notifications,
those
horrible. But you go forward, and that's why we have our mentors, and that's why John has always been my mentor, and you know what I'm saying? I'm just so glad he's involved in everything. And you know what? And I keep telling John, that you're going to be back up. You're on the stage, so just don't worry about anything. You're on your way back. You're on your way back. He's like, yes.
Now the thing now is he gets to leave rehearsals early now, though. We could have like an hour and a half left. They'd be like, all right, you guys fun, out of here.
So not knowing you guys are already in rehearsals and thinking that I was going to ask you about the set list and figuring you guys are going to tell me all the cliches answers like, well, you know what? The festivals, we get an hour. The headlining shows, we get 90 minutes. We're going to come up with a set list. We're all throwing ideas. I knew the answers were going to come. So I decided to design a set list for you, and I'm going to read it to you. All right. So I got a 16-song set list for you.
Freebird there.
There we go.
It's Freebird there.
There we go. Ready? You're going to start off with 3 songs out of the gate with no breaks. Welcome, City Beneath the Surface, and Jesus Saves. That's your first 3 songs.
You're kind of close.
All right, Zach. So now you're going to say hi to the crowd. Edge of Thorns, Handful of Rain. We're going to slow the pace down into Chance. Okay? Now it's building. The show's building. Now you got to kick it up into high gear, but you need a little breather, a little change of pace. Johnny gets out there and he plays the bass line for Of Rage and War. Of Rage and War into Power of the Night. Okay, so now we're back to the old school. Now we're going to go deep to one of my favorite tracks off Edge of Thorns, Conversation Piece. That's the deep track. Now we're going to slow it down because you need a little piano in there. We need a little bit of slow pace, so we're going to bring in Alone You Breathe. Now we're about 3/4 of the way through the set, and we're going to go into high gear, and we're going to accelerate the set. 24 hours ago, Sirens, Dungeons Are Calling, and you're going to close the show with Gutter Ballet, and you come back for a 2-song encore. Believe is your first one, and then, of course, Hall of the Mountain King is your last song. There's your show, guys.
That's really good. What's funny is everything, I'm kind of like looking at the ideas that have been passed around, and it really mirrors a lot of what you said. There might be a couple of songs that aren't on here, but guess what? Now we haven't hit the idea phase coming up where people get to put in their favorite 4 or 5 that's not on the list. And then guess what? Some of my favorite is ones you named. So I think this is going to be really close. What about you, Chris?
All right.
What did you
that's
hear?
Awesome.
What did you see?
Well, I always tell everybody I'm the last person you want to make this set list because we'd be playing for 4.5 hours.
Everything.
That would be the thing. I'd be like, we got to do Warriors. We got to do Unusual. What do you mean there's no Unholy? I'd be like picking out everything, and it would be way too long. So I just let everybody pick. I like all the songs, and I think pretty much the fans are going to be happy. You picked, a lot of title tracks. The title tracks for Savatage were some of the biggest tracks on the record. Some records have title tracks that are not the biggest songs on the album, but for Savatage, they really wound up being a lot of the signature songs for the particular albums. And actually, Poets and Madmen was the only record, I believe, that we released that didn't have a title track. And oddly enough, there was actually 2 of them. And it was one that Paul and Al were working on. There was one that me and John were working on, and we couldn't decide which Poets and Madmen to use, so neither of them did. And the funny thing is, when we were talking about doing a new record, John brought out the one that Paul and Al were doing, and I was like, well, what happened to ours? And then he brought up the fact that he borrowed the music for Nonsensical Ravings of a Lunatic Mind on his John Oliva record is me and John's music for Our Poets and Madmen, which so if the Poets and Madmen title track does wind up appearing again, it's going to be the one that Paul and Al wrote, because me and John's was borrowed. A lot of my music gets borrowed from John Oliva, and it wound up on his solo record as that Nonsensical Ravings of a Lunatic Mind. That was Poets and Madmen, Sinners and Saints. That's what that was in the chorus. So his Nonsensical Ravings of a Lunatic Mind was Poets and Madmen, Sinners and Saints. So just for a little bit of Savatage history, you're the only people on the planet that have ever heard the title track for Poets and Madmen.
Amazing stuff. Breaking news, guys. Breaking news. Guys, you alluded to it earlier, and it was going to be a question of mine is who's going to play piano, but it sounds like you're rehearsing or you're trying out a piano player, maybe bringing somebody from the TSO camp in, something like that?
No. We would have had somebody from the TSO camp in, but back to our speaking about people, God help us, that have left us. Vitaly passed on us last year. Vitaly played with Savatage at Wacken. He would have been the one who had been working with John if John was there. So then we would have added somebody to work with John. And what we're doing with this is the same formula that TSO always has done. There's piano parts and there's string parts, and there's, a lot of things. And we're going to be bringing 2 players with us, and we went and auditioned people. They're not from the TSO world. We have 2 individual people that are also very good singers, because, the one thing we were able to do with Wacken was do a lot of the counterpoint stuff with, multiple vocals. Now, obviously, we don't have 10 background singers or 8 of them. I think it was a Wacken on each side of the stage or whatever, but we're increasing from where we were as a 6-piece to be able to do a little bit more of the parts and add some of the harmonies on, because with the 5-point counterpoints, if you only have 5 people singing, you really can't do the harmonies on top of them. But now with 2 extra voices, you can at least harmonize a couple of the parts as it's moving across, and then some of the bigger parts are going to have the bodies of 6 people singing, because Jeff will be the only one that's not going to have a microphone or be singing, so you're going to have 6 of us trying to do our damnedest to sing that stuff live.
I can tell you right now, the vocal component has taken a huge leap forward. I love that. I said, man, the bigger the better. I'm the one who teaches the the counterpoint stuff, and I'm having an amazing time. I mean, I'm so happy that the vocal component of the whole thing is going. I'm always for more, better, and this is the best we've had. So I'm excited about it. And that's just one component that's gotten real good. I mean, Criss there playing these, God, I have been telling him, I think that he's got somehow the spirit of Criss Oliva has entered the man. He is doing you're doing an amazing job on those leads. And it's just like, I mean, so many things that included have taken huge steps forward. And we're looking at this thing to build it. This whole thing, Savatage coming back, it was never meant to be some explosion that just, fizzles out overnight like the volcano. This is everything is to build going forward. This is a long-term plan. So I'm so happy with the progress we've made in so many areas already, even before we get the stage. And of course, you got to hit the stage to get everything honed in. But we're looking at it as a long-term thing, so it's not putting a ton of pressure when you look at it that way. You just try to, you take your bumps, you learn along the way, and you get better and better and better. It's a long-term proposition.
Well, that was going to be one of the questions. Go ahead, Criss.
I'll be playing.
Okay.
No, I was going to say on what Zach was saying, I'll be playing songs that I played for years with Savatage live that were Criss's stuff, and I'll be sitting here playing, and all of a sudden I'll go play the solo, in a completely different part on place on the neck. Really good. It's like out of nowhere, and there'll be songs I'd never played before that I put the stereo on and start playing, and I know the solo. It's just been like some little bit like
Something's
Zach was
going
saying,
on.
there's a little bit of there's something
How
going
about
on.
there's nothing's going on.
It's
There's
definitely
something's going on.
the realignment of my hands playing correct parts somewhere else in a place I never played them, and not even knowing how or why I determined to pick that spot.
Keep going.
Is the weirdest one, because either I said to one interview I was doing with Johnny the other day, maybe it's just 30 years of the influence of Chris taking over, and finally I'm actually playing similar to the way he was, or there's like a little intervention. But it's fun because for me, it makes it feel like they're still, it's like you're always there, like they're on your shoulder and they got your back, and that kind of thing, and I just want to make him and Paul and the fans and everybody proud of what it is we're going to be doing. So, and Zach, he's singing his butt off, man. Everybody's going to be really happy when they hear Zach. Zach's got a lot of work to do with the Oliva not being there this time, but he's singing his butt off, man. Zach is a robot. He's not the man.
But
he's
here's
not
the thing.
human.
Singer world is very, singer world is like, you never know what's going on when your voice is your instrument. You got to take care of the stuff. You know what I'm saying? So it's always a little dicey, especially since 2020. Singers are in a world of madness. So we just always hope for the best. Treat yourself right. But the number one thing I'm most excited about the Savatage, bringing the live music, which was badly needed, bringing the live music of Savatage live to the masses. You got to bring this music live, and that's what we're doing, and that's the most important element of the entire thing. And everybody involved, we talk about everybody's involvement. It's taking all that to bring this amazing music back live, and when it's done the way we do it, there's nothing like it. It's all about live rock and roll. That's the reason I started in the music business. The first concert I ever went to was Kiss, 1976. Destroyer tour. There you go. It was about live music. That's why we do this. So that's what we're here for.
So the tour routing, guys. So again, you're doing South America in April. You're playing some big festivals in Europe. You're playing Grasspop in Belgium, Hellfest in France, some other dates around there. The magic question is, I think Jeff there was a news article hit yesterday where Jeff stated there'll be no U.S. shows this year. Why is that? Why no U.S. shows? And will we see it? Maybe the Starland Ballroom for a warm-up show one of these days.
Yeah, I mean, we're warming up. We're like I said, we're building this thing up for the long haul. I don't see any issues with U.S. coming up. We have to start somewhere. We're going to start in our core markets. That's what we're doing. We're starting the core market. It's a long-term prospect. I would say, yeah, the U.S. is coming at some point. We're not going to just leave that alone. We're going to figure out how to do some stuff.
And there, you also got to remember, there's a lot of the United States, and once you get towards the middle of the summer, pretty much around June, even sometimes in May, I would start doing radio ads for TSO's tour. And the TSO machine, the management and everybody, they're working with us on the Savatage thing. And, to go and have Savatage dates in September or towards the end of the summer, I mean, it's right now, that's stuff that would have to have been put together already for that time of the year. I mean, we were just planning on doing this now. We did not know what the reaction was going to be like when we decided to take the show. We didn't know that our headline shows in Germany were going to sell out in a couple of weeks. We had no idea what was going to happen. So, of course, we're now looking at where to go and how to do it. But in everything with this, we want to make sure it's done correctly. We're not just going to go, hey, well, we could next weekend, nobody's doing anything on Saturday, let's book a show. It's like we're taking production, we're doing a lot of rehearsing, we're using the lighting designer Brian Hartley from TSO is doing the Savatage shows. So we're really trying to take this element of all the stuff we've learned from Paul and TSO and working in with Savatage is just really being that, fine oiled machine that we always work in every year with TSO. When we do those shows, we don't step on stage without rehearsing it to the point where it sounds like we've played live for a week, and that's what with Savatage, if we were rearranging a set for the States or, in a perfect world, John maybe he's going to be able to play when we do the States. We just want to make sure it's all right, and I think there's not really enough time to piece it all together. So, I mean, we're planning on going everywhere.
Well, that's good stuff. And I mean, we'll be patient, as you know. So, guys, I want to say best of luck with the tour dates. We'll be rooting you here on from the States. But before we let you go, just a little bit on the new music. I mean, can you share any details about the new music? Is this a full album, just a couple of new tracks? And maybe how will the band's sound evolve in this new chapter, yet, kind of stay true to the classic Savatage sound?
It won't be the Poets and Madmen that me and John wrote. That's all I know. No, I spared John. Well, Zach can answer that question. He knows what songs he's been working on with John, so it's a lot of stuff.
Well, I can say there's a ton of music, and it's still coming. John is like a musical volcano. There we go again. It's still right. He's still writing new songs. So, and we had 20 or more, and now he says, guess what? I keep coming up with stuff. So I said, you know what? Beat the old stuff. It's all, we had an old thing we've always done in Savatage. If you can beat something, then beat it. So he's beating the old stuff now. So the new stuff's kind of replacing the bottom of the, the replacement thing. So there's a ton of music. And John has actually told me, he goes, man, we might have to make a double CD. I mean, if it's going to be like the last one that he was talking about, it may be a double. So it's not just a single CD we're talking about. It could be a double album. It sounds great. And the thing that I'm excited about coming up, it's funny that, with me and John singing together and everything, on the live show, we had duets. But when you look back on everything recorded, we don't have any duets. Well, guess what? That's going to change in a big way, because we've got some of those. We have a couple of songs that me and John are doing as duets, and I'm so excited about that.
My prediction is that this record will be the first. It'll be the first last record. It'll be the first of the last records. So, and that the curtain may not be going down; it might be rising up right now. So the curtain call, he doesn't exactly say which way it's going. And if I was, seeing by the way we've all been talking, I think it may be the first last record. We might have 10 last records. You never know. But right now, the machine is moving. Savatage is back out there. We never broke up. That's the one thing that always gets me with this. Is like, when people said ex-Savatage, it used to bother me because I'm like, I don't remember us breaking up. We just were like, kind of high. I remember when Austin Powers was like frozen. It's like we got out of the cryogenically frozen stage, and we've melted down and we're ready to go. It's like we just took a long break. There was like I said, those last 10 years, you blinked your eyes in 2015 went to now. And we didn't want that to happen again. You could watch time fly by so fast nowadays. And it's the right time for us to do it. Everybody, like Zachary said at first, we're all still here, and we're going to go see the people that never had a chance to see us and the ones that have been missing seeing us.
Yeah. And we got duets coming up.
So I'll be on Blabbermouth on April 20th, waiting to see those first videos coming out here, hanging out in my home studio. So, guys, we appreciate your time today. So, for more information on Savatage, head over to savatage.com for all of their information and links to their socials. So, guys, for my guests, Zak Stevens and Chris Caffery, I'm Metal Walt, and this is Metal Mayhem ROC.
Thanks, Walt.
Metal for life.
Thank you for listening to Metal Mayhem ROC. Check out our website at metalmayhemroc.com for information on podcasts, archives, links to all our live radio shows, and all sorts of info. Please like, follow, and share with everyone, even your non-metal friends. And always remember to keep it heavy.